Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Classroom Hacks book review for Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology. This one I am really looking forward to getting into. I'm really excited as this book was incredible. I really enjoy Neil Gaiman's work, and the fact that he was the author and storyteller of this for the Audible book, I was really taken in and enveloped in his storytelling. But before we get into that, as always, let's start with this live from the Pantheon of Pedagogy, the Mecca of Methodology, your rest away for reviews where you can seriously learn to take teaching not so seriously. This is, and we are, Classroom Hacks. And welcome back to another review video here on our YouTube page. I hope that you've enjoyed these so far and they've given you some sort of insight or enlightenment or illumination to any of these books or podcasts or items that you can sit down and listen to or enjoy on your spare time. As stated earlier, this one today is for the review for Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology. And as always, a quick synopsis for you and some background about the book. This synopsis comes from Goodreads, and it is as follows. Neil Gaiman, long inspired by ancient mythology in creating the fantastical realms of his fiction, presents a bravura rendition of the Norse gods and their world from their origin through their upheaval in Ragnarok. In Norse mythology, Gaiman stays true to the myths in envisioning the major Norse pantheon: Odin, the highest of the high, wise, daring, and cunning; Thor, Odin's son, incredibly strong, yet not the wisest of the gods; and Loki, son of a giant, blood brother to Odin, and a trickster and unsurpassable manipulator. Gaiman fashions these primeval stories into a novelistic arc that begins with the genesis of the legendary Nine Worlds and delves into the exploits of deities, dwarfs, and giants. Through Gaiman's deft and witty prose, these gods emerge with their fiercely competitive natures, their susceptibility to being duped and to duping others, and their tendency to let passion ignite their actions, making these long ago myths breathe pungent life again. And that is a well-described summary for Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. And here's the sort of classroom hacks overview of the piece. I will say this: if you are a fan of God of War, as I am, not just the original games from the early PlayStation consoles, but even the most recent one where Kratos is dropped into the world of Norse mythology.
More importantly, I know what you are.
Boy.
Or a fan of Norse mythology in general, I would highly, highly recommend listening to both Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology and then playing God of War, whether you want to do the stories first and then play the game, or play the game first and listen to the story, or do them simultaneously. It's a great way to really get fully immersed into this sort of Norse mythological world. Gaiman brings the world of Norse mythology to life, but God of War brings you into the world of Norse mythology. In fact, during this review, or I should say after the review, I'll do something that we don't typically do. I'll provide you with some images from the game, and so you can sort of connect them to some of the stories and some of the characters that we see throughout the novel and throughout the piece, and so that you can sort of kind of get an idea of an image of what they might look like. And so this should be hopefully helpful if you want to stay tuned to the end to see some of these characters. It could really give you some sort of insight into what you can envision as you listen or read the book. As with Stephen Fry, if you haven't listened to or read Mythos or Heroes, and now he has released Trojan War, or Troy, I should say, which will be a future review, Gaiman brings these characters to life, and if you cross-reference it, like I said with God of War, you'll get plenty of overlap and plenty of additional mythos from each of the respective pieces. So there's some stories that Gaiman touches on in Norse mythology, and then there's some backstory and origin stories from Mimir that he tells in the God of War discussion, or in the God of War game. You can definitely tell Gaiman is influenced to a degree by the actors who have played respective characters. So, for example, when he reads Thor's lines or he reads Thor's dialogue, You definitely get a hint of Chris Hemsworth, and his Loki, which it definitely feels either just as Gaiman is making a slight modification to his voice, but it definitely sounds like he's paying tribute to Tom Hiddleston, who I have even a higher degree of respect for his portrayal of Loki now that I have even more backstory into the Loki character from Gaiman, who really shows the cunning and manipulative side of Loki, the sort of clever and witty elements that Loki brings to the Norse mythology. I now can see that Hiddleston also did his research and studied Loki very well, and I really appreciated both their interpretations. And so what we learned from the book, or from the reading as well, is that Gaiman covers the story of the gods, but we get plenty of backstory and adventure pertaining to a few particular characters. We get a lot of backstory and a lot of different side quests and adventures in regards to Thor. We get plenty of story in regards to Loki. And if you play God of War, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, you kind of get an interesting sort of twist into where Loki comes from. And it's interesting because even in Gaiman's discussion of the Norse mythology, there's still a little of ambiguity of Loki's exact origins. And so God of War sort of puts a little twist into that, which I thought was interesting and didn't really consider it until hearing Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. Also, we get some good backstory and some good side stories in regards to Freya. Definitely a lot in regards to Odin. We get some discussion about Balder, who is also in the God of War series. We get some backstory from Mimir, the All-Knowing. Plenty of stuff in regards to the giants, including the world serpent, who I will also provide you with a picture here. And yes, we even get some backstory into my two of my favorite dwarves in Brock and Syndry. And so Gaiman really does a fantastic job in bringing some of these characters to life in the stories that he tells. He's got great cadence. He's got excellent sort of interpretation, and really knows how to set the pace for creating a scene and really showing and displaying some of the arrogance of the gods, the cunning and manipulative nature they have, the sort of way in which this world and variety of worlds is sort of fine-tuned as well. So that was a unique take on that. In terms of usage, how I would use this in a class, as with Mythos and Heroes by Stephen Fry, I feel this is the way that history should or could be taught. Primarily in bringing in God of War, you can bring your students through the Norse world and really sort of show that atmosphere and environment on a different level. You can observe some of the themes of Norse mythology, such as loyalty, betrayal, how absolute power corrupts absolutely. Mainly, you can examine the theme of destiny and fate, as even the gods cannot escape this sort of thing. And kind of doing a walkthrough with some of those things and utilizing some of the elements that you have from the game, and then some of the approaches and interpretations that Gaiman provides, is a good way to show how stories can be told, is a good way to sort of correlate how some of these themes, even such themes as like hubris, could even be shown in today's current society and current culture, and in what way that could ultimately lead to particular downfalls for individuals or communities. As far as the rating goes, this would definitely get a 4.5 or even a 5 on my scale. The only areas of critique or partial criticism that I would have, and these are really minimal at best, is that one, I just wish there was more. I love Neil Gaiman's work. I love his interpretation. I love his storytelling. So to want more of something is definitely the most sort of honorable critiques or criticism I suppose one could give. And the other criticism or critique I could have is that I'm not entirely sure how chronological it is. We definitely get the structure where you get the beginning and then you get the end with Ragnarok, and you get the beginning of how everything sort of came to be. But everything in between, I don't know how chronological it is. Obviously, with Stephen Fry being sort of the standard in terms of this, you get much more content and material from Mythos and Heroes than you do from Norse mythology. But Fry really does a deep dive with that. Whereas with Gaiman, you get a great story, wonderful interpretation and acting, but I just wish there was more. And you could obviously, if you wanted to, most likely could make this a 30-hour book if you really wanted to do so. And so, like I said, excellent read, fantastic piece. I would highly recommend listening to the Audible version of it, as you get to hear Neil Gaiman do these characters and tell these stories. And if you're just a fan of his voice and speaking, it really comes through in this. And like I said, he really pays a nice homage to some of these other characters that he interprets. For our next review, we will be getting into probably the front runner so far for my book of the year in terms of the reviews that I've been doing, and that is Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. That is going to be a fantastic discussion, a wonderful review, taking a look at something we're all familiar with in regards to emotions, and sort of unearthing and revisiting and looking at them through a whole new light and perspective. So that is one that I look forward to discussing with all of you. And if you made it to this point of the video, as I said earlier, I'm going to provide you with a few sort of characterizations of these different characters so you can sort of see exactly what you can envision when you are listening to Neil Gaiman's piece here. So the first character we get to see here is Thor, the at least God of War interpretation, which is, as many people have suggested, a more accurate representation of what he would look like in terms of the sort of Norse lore. He's got red hair, obviously has a beard. He has his legendary hammer, and his armor, oddly enough, is somewhat similar to Kratos's armor as well, and both being gods, both having these mighty sort of backstories and legendary sort of lores to back them. This is definitely a wonderful sort of interpretation and imagining of what Thor would look like. So if you are reading the book or listening to it, this is kind of the image that you might get when thinking or considering Thor. Here we have Odin, the all-knowing, the all-father, the original OG god here, obviously played by the legendary Anthony Hopkins. Odin is not in the God of War series, but essentially when I did hear and listen to Gaiman's sort of interpretation, you know, having only a few sort of ideas of what to imagine Odin as, similar to Zeus and other sort of theological hierarchies in terms of what a god would look like. This is essentially the sort of image that came to mind when thinking of the All-Father, the God of gods, the one who's sort of put everything in motion. As stated earlier, I definitely think that Gaiman's interpretation of Loki really sort of is an homage and tribute to Hiddleston's sort of take on Loki, which I think were both fantastic. Like I said, now that I've listened to sort of Gaiman's sort of breakdown of how he sort of seen and understands Loki's character and personality and psyche, Hiddleston, I really have an even higher degree of admiration and respect for his take on the Loki character. Two other characters who are some of my all-time favorite duos and sort of buddy comedy in God of War are Brock and Syndry. Gaiman doesn't really go into detail too much about their physical appearance. Brock is blue in the game, but if you do get to play God of War, these two are some great points of levity in the game, and they're both really unique personalities. Syndry is definitely on the much more sort of hypochondriac side, and Brock is the much more abrasive, straightforward, rugged individual. But as he describes them in the book, I can definitely see how these two sort of personalities are similar to what you see in the game. And then if you listen to their backstory in the book and then play the game, you really get a much more in-depth sort of idea of who they are as individuals. Excellently done and portrayed. And then lastly, to sort of round this out, a few other characters that you kind of get an idea for what they could look like when you are going through the book is Mimir on the left here, the severed head of Mimir that Kratos has to sever, and he does carry him around, which is nice because in the game, Mimir does provide a lot of the background and lore to the world that you are inhabiting. and so you get more information in regards to the Norse mythology. He's also a great sort of sidekick to have to the duo of Thor and Atreus, who you later find out is Loki. Spoiler alert. In the middle, you have Freya, one of the legendary gods. In the game, she has been sort of outcast and shunned by the gods. And in Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, you get a lot of different backstory as to how Freya was sort of used as leverage in different situations, how she was potentially going to be sold off or married off to different giants. And in the game, you definitely get to see more of the independent, strong-willed, really fierce character that is Freya. And then you have the world serpent here on the right-hand side, as described by Gaiman, and even in the game, the world serpent is humongous, enormous. I mean, there really isn't too many other adjectives to describe how just titanic this creature is. He can circle the entire world in terms of Midgard, and in the game they do an excellent job of just really creating his height and overall size in regards to the characters and how he sort of inhabits the entire world that he's in. So I hope you've enjoyed this review for Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. I hope that the images that we've kind of gone through here at the end were also helpful in allowing you to sort of envision what these characters could look like as you listen to Neil Gaiman's rendition. Again, I would highly recommend picking this one up or listening to the Audible version, especially if you are a fan of Gaiman in that regards and his storytelling. So from here, until next time, fellow hacks, I hope you enjoyed this review. As always, if you like this video, please give it a like, share, and subscribe so you know when new notifications come out. Aside from that, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And as always, fellow hacks, I hope this content is able to help you in any of your classroom adventures and provides you any sort of enlightenment or entertainment as you listen along.